Welcome to G5's Turn Marketing into Move-ins, Top Trends for 2020.
Hi guys, my name is Megg Shaw-Butler. I'm G5's Senior Director of Multifamily Strategy. I came to G5 from the multifamily industry where I worked in private equity as an asset manager overseeing a portfolio of multifamily properties.
My name is Christina Aguet. I'm a key account manager. I've been working in lead generation and digital marketing for real estate on the vendor side for the past 6 years.
So before we dig into the trends we're expecting to see in the multifamily industry in 2020, let's recap some of the operational challenges the industry encountered in 2019. Affordability, owing largely to strong renter demand found in the workforce housing sector, drove steady occupancy figures and continued average effective rent growth in most major markets in the U.S. However, still placing rents at a high rate above what most working folks can afford. The nation saw low unemployment rates as well, which drove the demand for rental units. However, it also made it challenging for multifamily owners and operators to find and hire on-site teams. And with respect to accessibility, the multifamily saw accessibility lawsuits shift from issues with physical asset compliance into digital website compliance and are still trying to figure out how best to handle this.
For marketers, these conditions have really created a climate of added scrutiny, especially in the digital medium. Digital marketing can help you overcome these challenges, but first you need to know your renters.
So for multifamily owners and operators, we really do have a deep understanding of our renters once they've moved into their apartments. But the reality is we know relatively little about our renters before they walk on site and enter our CRM. And even what we know about them then is not really enough to ensure they have all the information that is needed to make a rental decision.
And for the past 5 or so years, marketers have been really focused on persona development as the answer to that question. But that's not what we're talking about in this segment. We're actually going to be diving deeper into the customer journey. How do they become aware of your brand? What online resources did they consult when considering their options? And how can they engage with your on-site teams once they've made a decision? These questions are critical to actually knowing your renters and are the perfect framework for finding those key touch points that most heavily influence their decision to rent with you. That said, it's time to take a look at the 5 trends that will help you turn marketing into move-ins in 2020. First up, predictive marketing. Now, this can mean a lot of different things to different people, but we'll be talking about it strictly in the context of digital advertising, which gets after that awareness stage of the customer journey. Next is crowdsourced reputation. Simply put, online reviews. This actually spans awareness and consideration. We'll get into why this is more important than ever before and how you can use it to your advantage. Third is website accessibility. This is more at the decision phase of the customer journey. Websites are now being looked at as a place of public accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Do you know how accessible your site is today and what you can do to mitigate risk? Then we get into guided renting experience. Also at the decision point in the buyer's journey. Let's help free up time for your on-site team and make it easier for renters to self-service on their terms. Related to that is personalization. In the era of digital, we as consumers are more self-centered than we used to be. Technologies like streaming services and health apps have taught us to expect brands know our preferences and tailor offerings to be more relevant to us as individuals. So how's that playing out in multifamily? Let's dive in. Predictive marketing uses data and automation to make proactive strategy adjustments. And within that definition, there are many applications, but perhaps the most impactful one for marketers is telling them where to spend. Meg, how have multifamily operators and owners historically been approaching this question of spend allocation and performance, and why should they be looking for alternatives now?
So this is pretty interesting. When you look at the average multifamily P&L, marketing is typically the smallest or second smallest line item. It's that necessary expense that is required to be spent in order to have prospects somehow find your property, walk through that front door. However, historically, in terms of performance analysis, whether a source has worked has largely been analyzed in the form of cost per lease with a preference for a low as cost as possible. However, as BI tools have become more common and owners and operators are looking to improve asset performance, they're discovering a variety of inefficiencies and are figuring out ways to address them. As part of these efforts, they're finding that traditional marketing analysis and distribution of marketing dollars is not necessarily driving the right sort of traffic to their properties, and that often the cheapest cost per lease does not mean the highest lifetime value of a resident. This is pushing the need for a shift in how marketing dollar performance is analyzed and how owners and operators can allocate future ad dollars.
So going from more of those traditional objective metrics to looking a little bit under the hood at qualitative metrics as well.
Correct. And ensuring the people that are walking in the door actually do have the ability to rent at your apartment, and that they're going to pay for that higher effective rent and probably pay for an upgrade unit instead of a conventional one.
So finding renters who are actually qualified to rent at your property is the end goal for smart digital advertising. G5 is using predictive marketing to fuel this aspect of our product and services with a new tool we're calling Spend Optimizer. Spend Optimizer looks at historic performance of your campaigns to predict which will convert at the highest rate for a unique user, and then reallocates funds based on that information. This is radically different than how campaigns are typically managed. For one, feedback loops for decision making are a lot longer when you're manually managing budget. It can take weeks or even a month to have enough data before an analyst would feel confident enough to make a change in the strategy. This tool has the ability to reallocate funds on a daily basis if needed because it's collecting so much more data than the typical advertiser has access to. And that leads me to the second major differentiator, which is the data itself that's being considered. Instead of looking at the last source that a user interacted with before converting, Spend Optimizer looks at multiple touch points in their journey to understand which of those were truly the catalyst for action and determines what kinds of conversions are most qualified based on that information. And I would say as an account manager, in terms of impact, I personally have seen a property's cost per conversion decrease by as much as 67% once the tool was adopted, which is completely mind-blowing. Now, obviously, results will vary, but it's pretty compelling.
It's compelling and also ensures that we're not paying large amounts of money for people to show up on site who are not going to be qualified for background or from a credit perspective, or looking to rent a 3-bedroom and you only have 2 bedrooms. So that reallocation will make a big difference to ensuring that who shows up on site is actually interested in what you have to offer.
Yep. But this is all assuming that they get to your website in the first place and that ad is viewing. A lot of people don't even consider their experience leading up to that point. So what do they see when they actually visit the search engine results page? And what other resources are they consulting when they're in the later stages of narrowing down the apartment they want to live at? Reputation is still a huge factor in that decision.
Completely. Now, the funny thing is when I first started in the multifamily industry, online reviews were pretty new. We typically expected to see negative reviews by disgruntled residents, paid their rent late and got a notice as a result, or didn't like how a work order was completed. So we expected to see that, but at the same time, we weren't entirely sure how to encourage positive reviews. And the reality is we didn't really know if that was actually necessary to do that, or if we had to respond to any of those reviews. So largely, online reputation scores or sentiment back in the day was not really something that mattered or kept us awake at night. However, this has definitely changed. In recent years, the multifamily industry has come to understand just how much value our prospective residents are placing in those online reviews, specifically for the ones that are either disgruntled or delighted. The big question is, how do we take what we now know about online reviews and make it actionable?
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of folks, just even starting that effort or initiative is probably the hardest part. If you don't already have a culture of online reputation management, it's really difficult to get started and gain momentum. So there's a few different pieces that I think you want to make sure to address as you're starting that for the first time. One is tooling. You have to have a way of monitoring for and responding to reviews at scale, and that's most likely going to be a software purchase of some kind. Ideally, that software would also include review solicitation so that you can start to ask for those reviews in moments or after a resident has had a really positive experience that they would be able to write about. And those two things combined are definitely going to get you off to the races in the best possible way. Second would be measurement. That same tool should help you establish a baseline and monitor the impact of your efforts over time. Some tools measure the outcome you're looking for with an average star rating, but others can focus more on behaviors of the people who are managing your review efforts, like average response time to a review. Third would be ownership. And this is really, really important. I would clearly outline who owns action around online reputation by including it in the job description, interview process, cultural events, and even compensation structure for specific roles. There's also this question of should resident-facing teams or the corporate office be responsible and own online reputation? And that answer is going to be different for every organization, but I would say my observation is that companies who put the onus on the property management teams see better results simply because those teams work most closely with the residents and they have the relationship. It's really hard to get people to actually write reviews. My friend Hannah, who did a photo session for my family, probably had to ask me 6 or 7 times to write a review before I actually did it. And like, she's my friend and she knows where I live. So if I won't even write a review for her after that many touch points, it's going to be really tough to see results when you just send one email from an anonymous figure that this resident doesn't even know.
So that's absolutely fascinating. I think when you start to look at the data that NMHC most recently produced for their 2020 NMHC Kingsley Apartment Resident Preferences report, you can see that it's changed tremendously in terms of how are people engaging with those reviews. So much to your point of, it's really important that you have a sense of ownership simply because 72% of apartment searchers read reviews. And if there are negative reviews, and it impacts their willingness to tour a property as a result. And more specifically, your decision to actually show up on site is influenced by whether or not somebody responded to your review even. So it's growing increasingly important that we figure out how to best tackle that, have best practices. And I do agree with you from an ownership perspective, when you put that onus on the actual on-site team, you have people there that are going to be able to give a much more personalized response rather than just a response that comes from a corporate head saying, we're so sorry you had a bad experience, but instead let's dig in deeper and figure out how we can make sure this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and if you're finding that you get pushback within the organization or from on-site teams about really taking this on, I think there's a couple of things to keep top of mind that you can really discuss with teams, and that is, number one, these are your actual drive-bys. A lot of people, look in their CRM system and they see drive-by, and it drives them crazy because they know it's not true. But these are truly your digital drive-bys. People are taking a sneak peek before they actually bother to get in their car and go down and take a tour. So think about that. And then also couple that with the fact that, this is, in essence, your digital curb appeal. And I can't take credit for that term. I have to give it to Jessica Gillette, Director of Marketing from Hercules Living. I think it's so perfect, and it just helps people connect the physical with the digital, because if a property manager, didn't have their lawn mowed at their property, that just wouldn't be acceptable. So digital should be seen in a similar light. And I think just having that top of mind really helps.
100% agree with you. So as we shift into the next trend, this is one that I find personally pretty fascinating. As I mentioned, I come from the property side, so very well versed in what ADA means from a physical compliance standpoint. So obviously we know what your asset needs to have in terms of ramps or sidewalk width. However, we're shifting into this digital age where there is an enormous amount of responsibility for digital compliance. The learning curve that's ahead for the industry with respect to what does digital accessibility or website compliance actually mean is going to be a big challenge in 2020 as we come to terms with what is required, what does the law state, and how can we best enable our residents as well as prospective residents to interact with us online.
Yeah, and if you're new to this trend or you're not entirely sure what you need to be doing for website accessibility, don't worry, we've got you covered. And for those of you that don't know, website accessibility refers to development and design best practices that allow all users, regardless of their ability to perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with a website. The most widely accepted standards are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, which provides procedures for creating websites that accommodate users who rely on assistive devices, adding a layer of usability and improving the experience for all. Assistive devices, such as screen readers, allow people with visual impairments to understand images and other visual content on a website. Accessible websites include features that improve usability with these devices. And this is a hotter topic now than it has been previously because of the rise in lawsuits, where plaintiffs state that websites are are a place of public accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Historically, as you pointed out, Meg, ADA didn't take the internet into consideration. I mean, this is a law that was first signed into practice in 1990, but that really started to change with the Gill versus Winn-Dixie case that went to trial and had a ruling around June 2017. It was the first ADA website accessibility case to go to trial and the first in which a judge ordered a business to comply with a particular standard, the WCAG 2.0 guidelines, and that really set a precedent going forward. Multifamily owners and operators need to make website accessibility compliance a priority to mitigate legal risks and do their part in making the internet a better place for all users. So consider the following when updating your website for accessibility. It can help you reduce risk. Get ahead of possible litigation by addressing accessibility issues, maintaining an accessibility statement, and providing options for users to contact you when they encounter issues on your website. It also improves your website performance. General accessibility updates can have a positive impact on overall website performance, including usability and search engine optimization. You'll be reaching a wider audience as well. Following website accessibility best practices ensures all visitors can have a good user experience and can easily access information about your facility. And imagine how this can help you stand out from your competition. If a user can't understand the content on your competitor's website, but they can on yours, that's a win for you. And at the end of the day, it just shows customers care.
I think that's pretty incredible when you consider that we've gone from the days of the physical compliance that I mentioned earlier and trying to figure out from a much more broad perspective how to do this from a digital side. I think 2020 is going to be a really interesting year to see how the multifamily industry responds to this and what best practices start to look like when we get further down the road to understanding what is needed to be truly compliant. So as we shift to the next trend, this is one that's sort of fascinating to me. When you start to look at the rise of guided renting experiences, you get to start thinking about chatbots, messaging apps, online scheduling, or self-guided tours. In the NMHC report that I mentioned earlier, the renter preferences survey showed that 48% of multifamily renters find chatbots actually helpful. So there's technically two ways to look at this. One, less than half of the website visitors wanted to engage with that bot. And two, the barrier to entry has been removed for 48% of the renters. Guided renting experiences like chatbot matter because they allow your renter to choose how they interact with your property. They're able to get the information they need about things like available units, pricing, or to schedule a tour when it best suits them. Using tools like this allows your leasing office to extend its operating hours beyond the conventional 8 to 5 and truly be open 24/7. So effectively, whenever your prospective or existing residents actually need you. Additionally, when you start to look at the tightness of the labor market for multifamily, the ability to leverage technology in a way that helps to bridge the gap for your on-site teams is enormous. Effectively, this technology helps your leasing agents focus on the resident or prospect that is actually physically standing in your office, and the technology piece gets to help you on the back end to help the folks that are online who are still looking for information.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember when chat first became a trend, there wasn't a bot component. So you had to have somebody staffed all the time in order to use it. And then it became this big debate of, well, should we just turn it off? If someone's not available, what do we do with those messages? Then it phased into, okay, if someone's not attending and they don't get a response in a certain amount of time, maybe we send that prospect a text message. And it was just kind of a confusing experience for everyone.
Yeah, there's somebody that I worked with previously, Kelly Weber from BH Marketing, who's the VP of marketing for them. And her take on this is chatbots really help you to reduce the friction in how people are interacting with your property. And when you think about what the leasing process is, it's a friction-filled experience. You know, we want you to come on site, so you got to take time out of your day, tour the property, then speak to a leasing agent, then take paperwork, fill that out, get proof of income. So the entire process itself is kind of clunky. And if we can at least start to make that process more streamlined and more inviting for prospects to move through, I think you just change that experience. And when you start to change that experience, you change with how people, just an everyday person, interacts and engages with your multifamily property. And I think it just creates for a happier resident in the long run.
Would you say that it helps personalize the experience?
Funny you say that. I actually think it would.
Well, last but not least is the growing use of personalization to strengthen the connection between a brand and its consumer through having the most relevant and convenient experience. And when I think of a best example of this, it would probably be Netflix. Watching The Crown and then seeing top picks for Christina, Downtown Abbey.
Yep, because it's 98% rated for you.
How did you know, Netflix, that I would be interested in such things?
Are you still watching?
Yes, I haven't finished it yet. So each renter journey looks different, and the marketing strategies and experiences needed to attract the right renter is different for each property. When you can leverage personalization to your advantage and reach that user based on the information you know, you're just making it more convenient for them to do business with you. And one way that we've been able to harness personalization is with the use of responsive display ads, which leverages machine learning and automation to pair different variations of photos and headlines into our display and remarketing ads based on that unique user. So instead of spending time conducting a tightly controlled A/B test to see what creative resonates best for all users, Google is doing its own A/B tests on a recurring basis and changing the ad that shows based on the preference of the person it's showing to.
I love this simply because if you've ever worked on a multifamily property, you know every single resident is completely different. So a resident that is in unit 212C has a complete different set of needs than the resident that might be in unit 213C. So when you start to look at that, the ability for us to be personalized in the front end piece for our prospects coming in through the door is just going to ultimately end up allowing us to better serve them once they do walk in the door and are actually our residents. So moving on to how can you apply some of these tactics today. When I start to look at this, I think if you can evaluate your property's business plan for 2020 and take a look and see how marketing strategies can actually help drive your operational success, it allows you to stretch your marketing dollars a little bit further and start having a conversation about how marketing generates revenue rather than just as an expense line item.
Also, work closely with all your partners to be sure that marketing investments are spent wisely and drive the greatest revenue for your assets.
And I think when you start to look at your marketing intelligence holistically, it allows you to fully understand where you sit in the market as well as where your competitors do and how best to outperform them.
And don't forget the importance of reviews and implementing a solid review strategy.
Love it. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to our 2020 Marketing Trends webinar, and we hope you got some content out of this that really worked well for you.